Hello and welcome to the Business Central Training Place, the channel for all things BC, where you get to not only learn how one of the best ERP solutions on the market works in detail, but also you get to see why you'd want to use any of the specific functions we're discussing here, and what is its application in the real world. In this video, due to popular demand, we'll be looking at a really cool feature called Configuration Package, or as it used to be called, Rapid Start. Or in other words, the main functionality you would use to import and export data to and from Business Central. So, of course, there are always custom ways you can develop to import or export data and add various processing rules, but Rapid Start is a really cool feature that I would say handles at least 90% of my import and export needs in projects where I work on. So I'd like to introduce you to how it works, and it's actually really easy and really cool. So I think you're gonna like it. And it's surprising how many people don't know about this or just don't use it because for some reason they think that this is not as useful as it actually is. And it's really simple. It can get pretty advanced, to be honest. I don't use all of its features on a regular basis. But yeah, I'll basically show you what's my regular use case and then explain some of the additional features which exist there. So it starts by searching for the configuration packages page. So you can do from the search. There is, of course, a menu in the main departments area where you can find this, but this is the important part, the configuration packages. And when you open this, you get to this page. And basically what you get to do here is create a new package. I'm going to start with a fresh one. I don't want to use this is the default one that you will find pretty much with any default installation and demo company that you get with from Microsoft. So if you hit the plus sign, you get a new package where you have to define a name. So let's say test. I like to put my name here so I know I can delete this later easily. And this defines that in this package you can define multiple tables, which we'll do in a few seconds. And these are the data that you're going to import and export. Now, in theory, you can create one package where you have one table, and that's okay if that's how you want to play it. But this is really intended to create a package which contains multiple tables, so you export a certain data set. So a good example would be you want to export all the items from one company and import them in another company or in a different database altogether. So you would put here not only the item table, but also the related other tables which are linked to the item table. So that's why the configuration packages exist in this way, rather than directly just choosing which tables you want to export. And there are some additional considerations to which we'll get in a few seconds. Before you get to the pages, to the table setup, there's a couple of more things you can set up here. You have a product version, which, I mean, this is just an optional field I usually excluded, but yeah, basically some extra text where you can define where you're exporting data from or where you're going to import it to. And this largely will work across different versions. I have to warn you that if you're trying to export data from a really old version of NAV, as it used to be called, and then try to import in the Business Center, you will most probably run into errors because the format of the package itself has changed a little bit. You can usually get away by exporting, let's say, from version 14 and importing to version 15 or 15 to 16. That should mostly work. Again, I wouldn't promise in every single scenario because I haven't actually tested in all of these. But I had a chance to export from like version 7, that's NAV 2013 R2, and it definitely doesn't want to do anything and have anything to do with version 17. So just a word of caution, there are some limits. There are also some workarounds for that, so I'll mention them later. The next thing you can set up, and this is actually or can be quite useful, is a language ID. Most of the time I have no reason to play with this, so I leave it just empty or a 0, which means that the language that's going to be applied is whatever is my default interface language. That is whatever you chose here under my settings. And by the way, this functionality exists all the way back to version 4, I think, when it was introduced. So it's a really old one. It has kept evolving. So not all of the settings I'm showing you here exist, but most do. And what it used to do is it used to depend on what's the language of the company that you opened. Now, where this is important is later you'll see when we start exporting to Excel, there are going to be captions of the columns that we're exporting, and this language ID defines the caption of the column, so the names of the fields that you are essentially exporting. So this is where it can be helpful, depending on whether you want to go through Excel processing or not. So if not, then you don't care. The next thing is you could define some kind of a processing order. To be honest, I don't usually do this. So the idea is if you define multiple different packages, then this could be like a priority, the order in which the different packages need to be processed. I haven't found a reason why this might be useful. I think there is a way how you can apply more than one package at the same time. I've never done this. I always do it one by one. So to be honest, this field I mostly skip, but it could be a helpful hint for if you're doing the export and somebody else has to do the import. So it could be just a way to structure your data. So for example, I don't know, import items and all the tables in the package before you import the price lists if they're in a separate package. That could be one that's useful. And the last thing in the header which you may want to configure is this small checkbox, exclude configuration tables. This is helpful when you start exporting the package itself. Configuration tables or some extra tables that may get added here on top of what you already set up, and they can be frustrating, although they don't really hurt. So it's probably a good idea to check this one and activate it just in case. Let me just quickly close and open this because nope, this is as small as it gets. Okay, so this is mostly what you set up before you actually start selecting the tables. So what I do 99% of the time is just set up a code, a package name, and ignore all the others. I don't generally care about the configuration tables. They don't bother me, but yeah, it's probably a good hint to check this all the time. Once you're done with that, then obviously the next step is, well, let's start configuring what are we actually going to export in this package. So the first thing you do is you have to select the table. There's generally, let's say, 3 ways you can do that. If you're just doing a couple of tables, the easy thing is you just click on these 3 dots, you get the list of all the tables. That's literally all the tables in the system, and that will include the system tables as well. So if you search for users here, you will, well, yeah, you get some of the more system related tables. So it is literally everything. You can even export the permission sets if you need to. So you see, we even get tables in the 2 million range. If you're a user that has never played with numbers, then don't worry, you get the descriptions and you generally search by them. So if you know exactly what you're looking for, that's you just open here and search. So let's go with item. And of course I knew it's 27, but yeah, maybe you don't. So this will export, you just select the specific table. This is also a cool way you can see all the tables that have item in the name. So you do not have to export all of them if you need to export the items, but it's a good way to search for some of the others. So basically choose the table that you want. You could have, if you know the number, you can just type the number here and that's just as fine. That's okay. And as soon as you go out of the line, as you know, that's how you validate the selection. You get a question here that some fields have 2 or more related tables. And this has to do to the fact that in some of the fields, you can choose an option which depends on what exactly you selected. In another field maybe. So you can say, yes, let's check what's going on here. And for example, in the put away unit of measure, which is going to be used, you have a relation table to the unit of measure, which I actually do not have a problem with that. And you can generally decide to change. I don't know why you usually have to do that. You can change some of the mappings and say, okay, so like change the rules or decide to exclude the field. To be honest, most of the time I don't have to do anything with this here because it's not an actual problem. And I think they've mostly cleared the issues with any of these. So yeah, I don't have a problem with that. So in this case, it's pointing to the unit of measure table. I would probably say that this has to be mapped to the item unit of measure table. But it doesn't matter. Both would be accurate during an initial import. So to be honest, again, most of the time when I get this, I ignore it because it's okay. The default mapping is what works for me, but just bear in mind that this is something that if you are doing something weird, so if you're not using the default mapped option, you may want to look at this. But anyway, during the next steps, you'll get to see why, even if you skip this step, it's still not an issue. So you select a table, and then basically immediately what happens is as soon as you go out of the line, it validates, you get the table name, and then you get to see these fields update. So what you see here is how many are the records in the package. Now we just created this one, so there are no records in this package. It's a new one. And you also get to see the number of records in the database. So at this state, it seems like I'm going to be exporting data rather than importing. And I'll explain a little bit later in more detail, but in short, the package records are something that will be updated if we use this function, for example, to import an Excel file. And then it gets imported here in the package records before you move the data to the actual database. So there is the package. It's like a buffer in between the actual item table in this case and the package table that you're going to import for items. And the rest is you see the number of fields, the number of fields you decided to import, and the number of fields that are going to be validated. And eventually you might see, hopefully not, fingers crossed, but you might see some errors during the import itself. So we're going to play with the rest of these later, but most of the time you just select this and then you move to the next step. Now, this is one way of selecting a table. You just either enter the number directly or you click here, you open the list and you select the specific table. There are other ways to do that as well. So one other way would be if you have somewhere in an Excel spreadsheet, for example, a list of tables that you know you're going to have to import, you can of course just copy paste this. So there have been situations where I, for example, have to export data from an older version of NAV, for example. So an easy thing to do is you can find out which are the tables which contain data, and then you basically just copy paste their numbers in Excel, and then you just import them into a package. So that would be a scenario where I don't have to search one by one. I already have the list. And it's a simple copy paste. You just copy the numbers and then you're done. So nothing complicated there. Now, if you're generating the exporting package, however, there is also another thing you can do, and that is in the header under process, you get a nice little feature called get tables. It's a cool function which allows you to select which tables you want to export specifically. So basically multiple tables at the same time. We're clicking here, you'll have to do it one by one. And you also can check to export only the tables which contain data. So that's a neat trick. So if you try to select a table which doesn't contain anything, then okay, it just will not be suggested. And you can basically click here, and what it takes you to is a selector on areas. So this requires you to have predefined another table, which is called a configuration selection. Again, I mostly don't use this feature because it takes some extra time for setting up, and usually I already know exactly what I want to do, and it's not really a repeat process. So most of the time I skip this, but if you want to, you can predefine this is another page you can navigate to, and basically it allows you to see. I don't think it lets me define from here, but you can choose which basically predefined list of tables you may want to be using here. So you have predefined areas, so you can say, for example, sales as an area, and then you can list all the tables which you consider linked to the sales. So it's an easy thing, just define this, and then you don't have to select the tables one by one. So this is something you may want to do if, for example, you envision exporting the data and importing it multiple times between different companies or different databases. Let's say you may want to configure a test environment. So this is a situation where I can easily imagine you may want to do this. But again, most of the time I don't really use this feature, so I'm not going to go through it right now. But it is an actual way to do it. Again, it actually relies on you defining configuration. You have a few things. So you have, let me just type the full name. So configuration, packages, worksheet templates, and you basically need to go through most of these to define all the other setups which are necessary for you to be able to select those areas and then go on with the, let's say, easy selection. I'll probably do another video where I go through setting up the questionnaires and the templates and so on. Again, these are nice, but there's something that is mostly used by partners if you want to do some kind of export of a whole module or something like this, and you're going to repeatedly do it. Or if you want to create, let's say, an import template to import test data to, let's say, an add-on that you're going to replicate across multiple databases. So this is mostly the scenario for a customer. From an end user perspective, this is not something that's, I won't say it's not useful, but it's not something that's going to get used as much. So most of the time what I will do is I will just go here, type the number of the table that I need to export, and then basically move forward to do the next ones. So there are a couple of, I'm not gonna check this now. There are a couple of additional features. A really nice one which can help you if you don't know which are the related tables is if you click on functions, you have in the lines this function called get related tables. So what it's actually going to do is going to insert some additional tables here for me, and you will recognize them that they're tables which are linked to fields that you populate on the item table itself, and these fields are lookups. They basically rely on clicking and selecting from an option which is defined in another table, like the country region, that's country of origin or country of manufacturing. Two fields use this table. You have a default vendor you can select on the item card. You have the posting groups, you have the unit of measures, tariff numbers, and so on and so forth. So it's a couple of fields here. So if you don't know for sure which are the related tables, that's a really easy way to do it. I think I haven't done it recently, but I'm pretty sure it's also going to pull in any customized tables. So if you have a custom field that was developed by your partner or by yourself, if you have the know-how, then it will actually, I think, suggest also here the whichever table this is linking to. So you select the tables, and if you really want to just export everything, then in theory you're good to go. You can just start exporting the package. What I usually do, however, is I also want to specify exactly which fields I want to export, and sometimes you also may want to apply some filters. So how you do that is you click on the line which represents the table that you want to export. So you will have to do this one by one. And then under the table button, you have a field here called fields. So you click this button, and what it shows you is a list. I'm gonna make it more full screen, a list of all the fields in the table. And you notice that for all of them, you have two checkboxes, include field and validate field. And I know the edit list is clicked, and that's why I've been clicking it on and off. For some reason, that's a little bit of a bug that exists for almost forever, at least in the web client. So you have to do it the first time in order to actually bring it into edit mode, and then you can see that you can actually uncheck these. So basically that's what you're gonna do if you don't really need to export some data. So let's say, for example, I don't care about the shelf number because I hardly ever use that field for anything. So you can uncheck this field, and that means that this is not going to get exported. It's also not going to get imported either. So you're basically excluding this field from the import-export that you're going to do. And you can go ahead and do this with as many fields as you want. For some of the fields, if you want, you can only skip the validation. So for example, maybe you don't want to validate some of the fields because, I don't know, for example, you don't want to validate the base unit of measure because maybe you don't want that to automatically populate the sales and purchase unit of measures. That's okay, and for some reason this was unchecked by default. Checking this means that obviously it's going to do the validate, which is the same function that happens if you manually populate the field. My recommendation will be, as much as possible, try to do validate the fields, unless you have some special reason to ignore that setup. One such consideration will be that maybe you want to just populate the data and you don't want the standard checks to be triggered. So wow, I don't condone doing this, but sometimes there are some fields that you cannot edit manually because there's some validation being done by the system. And sometimes you can, depending on how the validation is being done specifically, but sometimes you can get around this and actually unchecking this field, it will let you update directly the item card, for example, or it could be a customer or something else. So to give you an example, I have gotten away with, for an item that was set up to not have item tracking, then somebody posted some transactions and then they realized, oops, we actually needed to have item tracking on this item. And just simply creating an import of the field item number and the item tracking code and unchecking the validate on the item tracking code did indeed allow me to put an item tracking code on the item, even though it already has transactions. Now, I had done the right thing, nullified the inventory, so there was no inventory in stock. So I don't really want to mess up with the data itself, but even with zero inventory, normally you're not able to do that because there's already existing transactions. So removing the validate field is a way around this. I cannot promise it's going to work every time for every single field. It depends where the validation happens and where the check happens, because you are still updating the field value. So it depends on how the code is written, but it is a way you can get around some of the checks in the system. Again, most of those checks, well, I should say all of them, are there for a good reason. So as a general rule, I'd say try to not play with this too much unless you really have to. If you don't know whether you should validate or not, I would say a general rule of thumb is just do validate the field. Just a good idea. Something else you can play with is, for example, if you are... Again, you should probably do this in the right order just by importing the tables. But let's say I want to import the items and I am not 100% sure if the unit of measure table, and you can see here the related table. If I'm not sure if maybe there is an item with a unit of measure which just doesn't exist as a unit of measure code, you can check this field here saying create missing codes. And it can be an easy workaround to first having to import the unit of measures and then importing the items. I would generally advise against this though, because anyway you end up with a unit of measure code. It doesn't put a description because where would it take it from? So it's a workaround rather than a proper solution for the issue. And I would generally advise against doing this. And my recommendation is, if you see this a field which is linked to another table, and as a general rule of thumb, first go and import all the necessary values in this related table, and then import this main table which is referring to that other one. So this will give you a good hint of what order you should be processing your data in, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few seconds. So these are important and pay attention to them. Again, it is a valid option. I have had reasons a few times to check this, but honestly, those reasons are mainly I was lazy. And it's not a good way. It's not a proper way to do things. You can get away with it, but it doesn't really save you the effort of still going and putting manually the unit of measure description, and could be the other fields as well which are in this table. So just bear in mind, but the function does exist. Now there is another thing you can play with, and that is the order in which the fields are processed, and this can be really handy. You may have very good reasons to change how this works. I wouldn't say it's so much on the master data list here in an item card or vendor card or customer card. It doesn't matter that much most of the time. But remember that you can actually use this functionality to import something like the item journal, for example, or the general journal, or even documents, item sales or purchase documents. And as you well know, the order in which you populate fields does matter there, because if you're inputting, let's say, the price first and then you update the quantity, then your price will get overwritten, because every time you input quantity, the system tries to find the best price for the line. So what you can do is, if you have a reason to change the type before the shelf number, then obviously this has to be on top. But if you want the shelf number to be imported first, or let's say the item discount group, then you can actually hit this and move where this field is in the validation order. And you can see it. Basically, this is really the order in which the fields are going to get populated once the import happens. So this is this can be quite important depending on how you do it. So again, most of the time I don't have to play with this, and I can leave it default. But when you're importing journals or documents, then yes, of course, you may have to change the default order, because the default order that you get out of the system is just based on the field ID. So whatever is the order in which the fields are created in the table, and that's not the order in which you should be populating the fields, at least not always. There is a really cool feature here. So if you're, as I mentioned earlier in my scenario where I had to overwrite the default item tracking code because somebody messed up, you don't always have to import all the fields. So in my case, I only needed the item number and the item tracking code. So these were the only two fields I wanted to import. There was no need to import everything else. So because of that, you have a really nifty button here called Clear Included. And what it's going to do, it's going to uninclude all of the, exclude, proper English, all of the fields, except any fields which are part of what's called the primary key. For the non-technical among you, the primary key are the minimum number of fields which define that a record in a table is unique. So for the master data, most of the time it's just the number. So the system knows that that's a unique item number just based on the number. But if we were to go, for example, to a table like the unit price, I don't have the sales prices here. So let's go to sales price, for example. And you will notice that if we go then and we play with the tables, fields, and we say, wrong button, we say clear included, then these always remain, and I cannot really uncheck them. I mean, I can try, but it just makes them not editable for me. And the reason is that the system only knows that that's a unique price based on the combination of all of these fields, because obviously you can have prices for more than one item. So it depends on which is the item, to what type of entity are we defining the price for, customer price group, all customers, and so on. Then what is the actual customer group, if there is one, starting date, currency, variant, unit of measure, and minimum quantity. So the combination of all of these fields has to be unique in order for the system to let you enter a new record in this table. So this is a little bit of an extreme example. There aren't many tables which are like this, but just be aware that if you're trying to import or export sales prices, for example, when you're using the standard sales price table, then this is the minimum number of fields you need to export and import, and the other ones are the only optional ones. So just for your reference, of course, for the master data, it's much easier. It's usually just the number field, and then you get to select which other ones you want to exclude or include. So for example, if I just wanted to, another use case, if I just wanted to update, let's say I told you that I very often don't use the shelf number, but then 6 months into the life of the project, the customer decides that they do want to use the shelf number for something. What they can do is just create a template where you have the number and the shelf are the only two fields which are included in this template. And then you can just import those two fields, and it's going to update all of the items with these numbers. It's not, obviously, it cannot create a new item code with the same number. So you can use this function to import and export whole new items or customers or vendors or whichever table you're using, but you can use the same feature to also just update existing records. So just export or import just specific fields. So again, selecting which fields you want to include or specifically which ones you want to exclude just gives you a chance to work with specifically the data that you need for the specific reason for which you're importing or exporting the data. Because ultimately, in the end, you're going to end up with some files that are going to take up some space. And why do you want to have data that you're not going to do anything with? And lastly, before we move out from here, obviously the same way as you have clear included, which excludes all the fields except the ones which are in the primary key, you have the set included, which will basically do the reverse, includes every single field in the table. And I don't know for sure. I should check why by default the base unit of measure is not validated. It's not a problem. And then, yeah, you can choose also specifically which field you do want to validate and which not. There is a function that I'm not discussing right now, and it's about mapping. So what you can do with it is you can basically create some rules where you can overwrite some fields value. Basically, think of it as some kind of ETL process where you can say that if in the importing file you find a value, let's say that if the base unit of measure in the importing file, in the Excel file that I'm going to import later, is defined like this, then import this as the value in the database, because this is how pieces or PCS actually most of the time is defined as the unit of measure code. And maybe in the import file they actually wow, that's the correct maybe this is just the text that was entered. So what I usually do is I don't bother with these rules, and I just fix the data in the source. But there could be reasons why you don't want to do that, or you cannot do it, or whatever it is. So this is, just think of it as mapping, that this is the data that's going to be imported, and this is what you actually want to get imported in the database whenever the system encounters this. So more or less a simplified ETL process. Again, I generally don't use this feature. I prefer to fix the data in the source, but it does exist as an option, so feel free to do that. So now that we have the table and the fields defined, I didn't really check everything. So yeah, let's clear include it, and let's just include the item number, description, and the base unit of measure. Let's just do that. So this is the first thing you can do with the table that you selected. Define which specific fields and which columns you want to export, i.e. or import, depending on the direction of the process. And now you can see that the number of fields available is whatever is the maximum number of fields, and the number of fields included is just whatever we just selected, and you also get however many of them I'm going to validate. So this gets updated all the time. Now, the next thing you can do is you can also apply some filters. So you probably noticed that I have a filters button here. Now, this is not something that's used very often, and this is generally useful when you're exporting data. So why I might want to do that is, for example, I have 21 items, and maybe I don't want to export all the 21 items for whatever reason. So the filters allow you to choose which specific items get exported. And you do that the same way as you would do by filtering the item list using the advanced filter. So you get the list of all the fields in the table. And you can say, for example, let's filter by description. And I want to export all the items which contain the word Athens in capital letters. So you can add a caps lock here, at symbol if you are not sure if it's capitalized or not. So basically using the same parameters you would do in using the advanced filters, and you just apply this. So essentially this is going to say that, okay, when we're exporting the data, it's only going to give me the items which correspond to that specific filter. And this can be really helpful if you're exporting data, let's say from the item journal table, for example. because very often what you find there is you usually want to export the records from a certain batch where you are working. Obviously, the item table contains all the records in all the different journal versions. So item table, where it's responsible for the item journal, physical inventory journal, reclassification journal, all of these versions, even the revaluation journal. And you probably want to only specifically export the records from a certain batch in a certain template of journal. So you will actually need to apply a a filter, unless you want to then have to manually go and delete the obsolete entries. So again, not a feature that's used all the time, but depending on what exactly you're exporting and why you're exporting, this can really help you save some extra work manually working in Excel. So a really nice one. I do use it not too often, but quite regularly. If you want to see what is the available data, you can actually just click over here, or if you click table, you have this button. It does the same thing. So this will actually open just the list with the data which is in the database, in this case the items, and you will see most of the fields. So in this case, this is just the standard item list. You can just see what are the items, and then you can see what filters you may want to apply or not. Again, I don't generally have to do this because I know what I want to export. But yeah, it's an option here. And the same way, you have an option to see the package data, which right now is empty because we just created this export, so we haven't imported anything yet. So after you do the first import, you can see what did you import and then try to play with it. Most of the time what I do is I would create a package, then select the tables that I want to export, usually before I do any import, and then select whichever fields I want to play with. If your goal in this process is to just import new items, then I would still recommend you have to go through these steps the first time, because you essentially need to create what's the template for the import. So one of the reasons why you may want to go and use the configuration package is because you are in a new company that you're setting up, and you want to just create some new items in this database in this specific company. Obviously, another reason is you want to export data from here and move it to another company, whether in the same database or in a different database. So in this case, obviously, just set this up, and depending on whether you want to just export data and then import that data that you exported into a different place, you use a different feature, as opposed to if you want to create this as a template so you can import new data in this company. So I want to start with the second scenario. So what I will do in this case is I will select the table, select the fields, select any filters that I may want to apply, and then I will assume that most of the time the data that I want to import exists somewhere in an Excel file. So what I'll do is I'll go to Excel and choose the export to Excel function. Now, when you do that, depending on which tables you selected here, so let's say I'll choose these four, or I could have just chosen all of them as well. It doesn't matter, but I don't want to deal with a large file with too many worksheets. What this function is going to do is it's always going to export one file. It is going to warn you which, however many tables you selected. And in this file, I'm going to have a separate worksheet for each table that I selected here. And of course, it opened on the other screen. So this worksheet, as you can see, contains this file contains 4 worksheet: item, inventory, posting group, unit of measure, and general product posting group. And it seems I didn't type my filter correctly because I have no items here in the export. Still, you do see that the filter does work, because essentially I did have some items, and as you can see for the other tables, I do get all of the records from those tables. So the default general product posting groups, the default units of measure and inventory posting groups, but I don't have any items in the list. So the filter worked. And if I had done it properly, we could have seen several Athens items. Nevertheless, the reason why you need to first export is that, as you can see, you don't just get a regular exported Excel file. You actually get some special structure. So these, the blue section here, which are the columns that I'm going to import later, They have some XML encoding behind them, so it's not just regular columns with text on top. And you shouldn't just insert new columns or delete columns nilly-willy. You have to actually use the same export that you used from the same template that you created by using the export. So if I suddenly realize that, oh, I need several more columns, I do need to go back, add them in the field selection, and export a fresh file as a template, which can be unfortunate, so be careful in the previous stages in the preparation. But once I'm at this point and I have all of my columns correctly set up, then it's as simple as saying SAMI1, SAMI2. Let's just create 2 items, 1 and 2, and then let's do that. Just 2 items and base unit of measure. I'm gonna put PCS and box. I'm pretty sure there should be a box in there. Now, a really nice thing that you probably already noticed by me hovering over here is that for each of the columns, each of the fields, you actually get a nice tooltip which tells you what type is the field and what are the available acceptable options. So in this case, it's a code and the maximum length is 20. So I can do some checks and see if I'm trying to import any field item numbers which are longer than 20 characters, so I can fix that before doing the import. So number 2 is code 20 again, description is 100, I think, yes, and base unit of measure is code 10. Now, I didn't think of exporting an option field. I don't think there is one here. Anyway, if there is an option field, you will actually, oh, there you go. No, that's a boolean, so that's true or false. So if you get an option field in the tooltip here, you actually see what are the available options. So that's actually, you know what, let me just go ahead and do that. So if we go to the item table under the fields and we add the type as an included field, I will be able to show you exactly what I'm talking about. The idea is that it's just a little bit easier to work this way, and I'm going to export specifically this table. So if you have options, this is a nice hint, and you will know exactly what are the available options you can play with. So you can see here, if I point at the type, I see these are my available options. Inventory, service, or non-inventory, and you have the number of the option. You should generally put the text. I don't remember in this version if it plays nicely. Some of the old versions you could get away by just putting the values 0, 1, or 2, and it knows which option you're talking about, but I think most of the time it's better to input the text. I haven't checked it in this latest one. So let me put my 2 test items. Okay, 2, and that's gonna be PCS, and that's gonna be box, and we're gonna make these inventory. Okay, so just save the file in a place which is easily accessible, in my case my download folder, and then you're done. Basically, you're ready to start importing the data. So how we do this is just select the specific table, then click import from Excel, and then you have to choose where is the specific file, and that's the one I'm looking for. And then you get, because the file could have multiple tables, you can, in theory, I think, I'm not sure if you can actually choose, but yeah, I think you can choose specific tables and just click import. Most of the time I import everything that's in the file because I need it anyway. So you immediately see that this turned red because there seems to be some package errors. I'm not sure why, but we can find in a second. But you can also see that the number of package records is 2 now because we, of course, imported 2 items. And you can click here and see package data, or you can just click on this number 2. It's the same action. And you can see that there is some invalid data for some reason. So this is how you see what data are you going to import. And you can directly see if there are some errors. You can just click show error, and it's going to tell you that inventory is not a valid option. Valid options are what? Oh, I mistyped it. So of course it has to be inventory. So the nice thing is you can actually fix that directly here. So that was a quick fix in this case. And as soon as you do that, you see the errors disappear and the table is now no longer red. It doesn't, however, necessarily mean I'm going to successfully import the data. So this error that appeared is something that basically is triggered by just saying validate relations. You can run this and just make sure that the links are correct. And it will automatically do this when you import the data. So it's basically going to make sure that at least initially the data that you entered makes sense, as in if it's an option field, you have selected an actually acceptable option. But if you're importing something like the unit of measures, in my case, PCS and box, it will only check if these exist in the other table during the import. So right now I can just type SAMI and it does validate it right away. It's, as far as I remember, it doesn't always do it during the import itself. So there are some checks which are not going to be performed. So it's perfectly possible. Don't be surprised. That might be a bad example. Maybe this one always happens during the import, but checks like whether the length of the field is sufficient or things like that can happen during the next step. So don't be surprised that maybe initially you imported the file and there's 0 errors, and then you do the next thing, which is basically try to import the data from the package to the actual table, and then you get some new errors. That's a perfectly normal behavior, and then that's okay. So basically the next step in the process is you will generally select the specific table, or if you're importing all of them, you can try importing all of them. But remember what I mentioned earlier, it matters in what order you apply these tables, especially when they're related. So if I was importing the items for the first time and, for example, I'm creating new units of measure, it obviously makes sense to first import this table and create those units of measure and only then start importing the items. And the same is valid for all the other fields that I might be importing, which rely on data already existing in those related tables. So assuming you've done that, then the next step will be select the table and just click functions, apply data. So what this does is it's going to attempt to try and put this data from the configuration package table to the, from the specific table with the configuration package data to the actual database record. So if we succeed now, you're going to see that the number of items increases to 23, unless there are some errors. So we're trying to do this for one table, and you can see one table was processed, 0 errors, 2 records were inserted, 0 modified. So obviously you'll see the modified if you were just updating new data for existing items. And you can see that now my database records are 23 and my package records are 0 because these were moved. And if I open here the item list, I should see somewhere at the bottom my SAMI 1 and SAMI 2, and I seem to have done this before with a different item. So anyway, so this is a very short and simple demo of how you can import one specific table. Again, you have to be careful to first export so first select the table, select the fields that you want to be importing, and export that table to an Excel file. And then use that Excel file as your template for importing the data. So move the data from wherever it lives now, put it into that Excel file, then you import from Excel, then you check any validation errors, and you of course apply the data in the end. And if you've done everything correctly, then the data just gets updated. So it could be as simple as that. It works pretty fast. It used to be working quite slower in the previous versions. Now it's very okay. Now, of course, if you're importing hundreds of thousands of records, you may have to wait literally hours, depending on how many records you're importing, because again, remember, you're actually creating and validating all of those fields and populating the data. But it's still hours, not days. So it's a very okay process. And again, this is how I mostly do initial data migrations when I'm setting up new customers. Now, as I mentioned, first of all, you can, of course, export multiple tables and import multiple tables at the same time. You can, in theory, highlight all of these tables here and, and then just say functions, apply data for all of them, and that's okay, but it's just going to start from the top and go down to the bottom. And there is no way to play with the processing order here on the lines. So yeah, you may have to actually be careful in what order you process the tables, and depending on the validations. There are some additional features which I'm not explaining right now. I might do it in a different video, but right now I'm just explaining the most common cases, which is like 99% of the time. So this is how you can easily import data. Just create a template, import, and obviously you can use the same thing to export if you just need to have any subset of all the items, rather than going to the item list and exporting from there, which is a perfectly valid option. But then again, the item list does not contain all the fields in the table. So this is your best friend if you want to export some fields which are on the item card but are not on the item list, or customer or vendor, or whichever one. So it's a really user-friendly way. Plus, obviously, this is most of the time quite a bit faster, depending on how many entries you're exporting. Now, another scenario for this is where you want to actually export this whole thing and go and put it in another company. So this is where the configuration package really comes into its power, because if I wanted to export the item table, and I just selected 5 fields in this case, and then I want to go and import these 5 fields in a different table, in a different company, then I can just use the export to Excel and then go to the other company, but then I would have to manually create a configuration package, select the item table, select those same fields, and then I actually do have to export the Excel file from there and import it, because something you probably didn't notice, and I didn't point it out in the file itself, the file refers to the table, but there are some hidden links to the configuration package itself, so you can't really use the same file with any generic company or different package. So if you want to move data between companies, and anyway it would be way too tedious to export to Excel and then import the same thing, you have a much faster option, and that's in the header. In the process, you have an option to export the package itself. So what this is going to do is it's going to export the whole package, the code, the description, any language codes, the list of all the tables which are here with the selected fields, and all the data from their database which is linked to this package. Something I haven't had a chance to play with is if it's actually going to apply the filters and only export the data applying to these filters. So I would hope so. So we can actually try this now. But basically, this way you export the whole thing, the setup of the package itself, together with the data that's contained in this setup package. And then this is exported to one single file. It's a special type of file. This one here, it's called a rapid start file. And then you can go to the other company where you want to play and import that one file, and it's going to recreate the same package. Now, remember this checkbox I mentioned in the beginning? If it was not checked, if it was not ticked, and I want to export the package, and the first thing it does is it creates some extra tables and adds them to the package. There you go, configuration question, line, and so on. So yeah, that's what I mentioned. It's not a problem. I don't care about these tables, and it's just fine if they're here. They will get imported in the new company, and you can just ignore them if you want to. But they will be added if this is here. And again, this has more to do with partners setting up add-ons and so on than most of the time using this for setting, just migrating data. But it could be helpful as well. So this is what this button does. So anyway, we have the exported package. So what we can do with it is go to my settings, go to a different company. So let's say the Kronos UK company here. And yep, I have to log in again. And I'm going to search for the configuration packages. And you'll see I do not have a test configuration package here. So what I can do is click Process, Import Package, and then choose that file, the first one. And there you go. You have your test package, which contains all of the tables. And because I imported the version which doesn't have the configuration ones, everything is just fine. But you see that now as package records, you have all the data, which is, and because these companies are basically copies of each other, you notice it's basically the same number of records. And for the item table, we did apply the filter, so I have 0 records because we did define that filter. So there is no records that correspond to the filter I did. So now I can basically just choose and start importing here. Again, I'm not going to do it because this is the same. They're mirror images of each other, so there is no new data here. But this is how you can easily move data directly between two databases or between two companies within the same database. And it's a really cool feature. You can, if you've imported a whole package, you can try and apply the whole package. So it's going to go and do the tables one after the other. Again, there might be good reasons to process the tables in a certain order. So this is not a magic button. It's not going to certainly do it in the right order. So again, I generally don't do that, but again, it depends on what data you're importing and what are the tables that were selected. So sometimes that could be an actually usable button. Validate package would generally try and go and check if there's any errors. I don't expect any errors right now, but we can see. So it's going to check all the tables and see the relations and make sure you've selected the right fields and the right tables. So I see, okay, for vendors, there are some errors because we are trying to update vendors, and yeah, I don't know what the error is. Let's see, just out of curiosity. Okay, yeah, there is a validation for VAT number. Okay, that's okay. So, yeah, so that's basically a very short overview of how you can use the rapid start. Now, again, there are some extra features that I didn't explain, and we are going to probably have a second video where I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can apply some custom rules. There are some nice features, like, for example, you can have the data be imported and posted at the same time. But overall, this is the main use case. So again, I use this on a daily basis to just export data and send it either for reporting reasons or just for just creating the template and then importing and updating data again in the database, or for data migrations, or yeah, whatever it is. So it's a really easy tool, really user-friendly, simple to use, I would say, and generally speaking, something every self-respecting consultant, and I'd say most of the super users, as we like to call them, should be aware of. It's standard, it's already in the database, it's just a couple of setups away, so I really encourage you to play with it a little bit and try, and it could simplify your life a lot. Again, you have to be aware that this whole thing depends on having the right permissions and being able to write to a table. So it's definitely not something you should enable for all of your users, but it's definitely the master data manager's best friend, I would say, in Business Central and NAV. So again, the nice thing is that most of what I showed you today is available in the older versions. I would say all the way back to at least version 7, and I'm pretty sure they introduced the first, let's say, grandparent of this in version 4 already. They used to call it rapid implementation methodology. So that was it for today. If you found this video interesting and helpful, don't forget to check the other training videos on the channel, the BC Training Place. I do my best to release weekly content, although I did have some issues the previous week, so I've been behind schedule, but hopefully we're back on track. If you want to be kept up to date on new releases, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss a new video. And if you have any recommendations or requests for other topics that you want to cover, please drop me a comment in the comment section, or if you have any additional questions. Feel free, if you'd like to have a personalized training session, to reach out to my company email. It's called training@isystems.com. I'll put the email in the description. And yeah, basically, see you in the next one.